I don't want to forget it. Yesterday, when you gave evidence with regard to the dismissal of Minister Nene, you indicated with reference to a question that you had been asked to deal with by the Commission, that the reason why you proposed that President Zuma should consider appointing Mr. Pravin Gordhan as Minister of Finance, and not suggesting that he should take back Minister Nene, was that you believed that maybe he would not want to take Mr. Nene back because, I think I may be mistaken, but you may have used the word trust, that maybe he no longer trusted him or so and so on. Was that based on a discussion you had with him, Mr. Zuma, or that was just your own suspicion that he had dismissed him or fired him because he no longer trusted him?
Chairperson, it was more based on our own conclusion that once something like that has happened, when the president has dismissed you, taking you back, even on proposal by others, could be problematic because your initial dismissal meant that there was no longer any trust. And the circumstances around this talked to a trust issue. And so that's why we proposed someone else. Yeah.
Well, I paid attention to that simply because it is not consistent with a media statement that was issued by President Zuma at the time, either on the 10th of December 2015 or on the 11th of December 2015, with regard to Mr. Nene's dismissal. I don't have the statement here, but we do have it. I think it was included in Mr. Pravin Gordhan's bundle when he gave evidence here. In that statement, Mr. Zuma spoke very highly of Mr. Nene as Minister of Finance. I can't remember the term that he used in that media statement, but it was like he was your star performer. Used a term which meant he had performed very well as Minister of Finance. And he said they were releasing him because he was when I say your government's candidate for a certain position in the BRICS Bank. And so the reason why you were asked to deal with the question was because if he had performed so well as Minister of Finance, one would have thought that firstly he wouldn't be released easily, but if he was released and the markets reacted the way they did, it would be very logical for the president to bring him back. But that was important because it's important to analyze that, because when Mr. Nene gave evidence before this commission, he said that story was fabrication. Effectively, he was saying there was nothing like I was really being released to go to that position. And I was hoping that Mr. Zuma, when he came here, excuse me, could deal with that as well. So I don't know whether you want to comment on that. Certainly, the media statement that was released by President Zuma at the time spoke very highly of Mr. Nene as finance minister, which did not suggest that he did not trust him.
Let me just say, Chairperson, it was political speak, and it's best to leave it there.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. Can I, for the sake of completeness, can I ask something else now with regard to Minister Godang? And I see that in your affidavit, when you dealt with the discussion among the ANC officials of the name of Mr. Brian Molefe as a replacement of Mr. Godang, you say that it was discussed, but what you don't say, which I would like to find out, is what I think other officials of the ANC that the commissioner asked to depose to affidavits have said, namely that it was a proposal from Mr. Zuma that Mr. Brian Molefe, that he wanted to replace Mr. Godang with Brian Molefe. I just want you to confirm whether it's not that you left that out because you have no recollection of it, but that you know about it, that was the case, or maybe you just don't have a recollection of it.
No. I think it would have been an oversight on my part, but former President Zuma did propose him.
Yes.
And they did not carry support.
Yes. And then with regard to Mr. Pravin Godang, I think Mr. Gwede Mantashe mentioned in his affidavit, maybe in his oral evidence as well, that Mr. Zuma mentioned also when I think there was a challenge with regard to the intelligence report that he referred to. When there was a challenge, I assume from within the officials, that Mr. Zuma also said something along the lines that his relationship with Mr. Godang had broken down. Is that something you...
And it did not really find its way into my statement because one was dealing with a whole range of other issues.
Yes.
Yes, he did allude to the fact that his relationship with Mr. Godang had actually broken down.
Yes. Is that something that you had observed in any gatherings where both of them were there, or is that something you yourself might not have been aware of?
It was coming.
Yeah.
One kept on picking it up.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it didn't just suddenly happen.
Yeah.
It kept coming. I mean, these are two people who had worked so closely together in the past.
Yes.
That it was, in the end, difficult to decipher that to be the real
reason.
issue and reason. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair. The present aim is to complete by 4 o'clock, and then the President has asked for a short period of time to make a closing statement, if that's in order.
Okay.
There are a number of isolated issues to deal with, but they all come back to the same theme that we discussed this morning, Mr. President. The one issue, rather one of the issues that you raise as being an aspect of state capture is what has been described as the poisoning of the public discourse with misinformation to divert attention from their wrongdoing. There are various aspects of disinformation or misinformation that have been the subject matter of evidence before the Chair. Amongst them are the Spiderweb document, which was related to the dismissal of Minister Nene, and the Checkmate document, which you're aware related to the dismissal of Minister Gordhan. But what I'd like to deal with is your statement in paragraph 26, bundle 3 at page 18. I'll read it to you if I may. It is important to acknowledge the use of ideological impetus to transform society where socio-economic inequalities exist, brackets, in developing countries in particular, close brackets, as we are. To question legitimate institutions and conceal state capture under the guise of reformation or transformation. In other words, using rhetoric, which on the face of it is legitimate, to conceal illegitimate activity. And then in that context, if I may ask you and quote back to you your own statement about the use of the RET acronym, Radical Economic Transformation. In 2017, you delivered an address on the title Unpacking Radical Economic Transformation. And it's perhaps in this context worth placing it on record, if I may read it to you, and you can comment then. Part of the problem with the current conversation, you say, about radical economic transformation is that the term has often been misused, misrepresented, or misunderstood. We now know that some highly paid PR specialists, and we know they're the ones residing in the United Kingdom, contrived a plan to use terms like radical economic transformation and white monopoly capital to launch a publicity offensive in defense of their clients. It was part of defining a new narrative where those who stood in the way of as being opposed to, quote, radical economic transformation, unquote, and representing the interests of, quote, white monopoly capital, unquote. It has therefore become accepted in many quarters that the term radical economic transformation is often deployed to either mask or justify activities that could best be described as state capture. Some people use the term radical economic transformation to proclaim measures that are intended to cement their radical credentials rather than actually achieve meaningful improvement in the lives of the poor. However, if we are to progress as a democratic nation, we need to ensure that we are not distracted or sidetracked by the misuse of the term. And it's interesting that that address was made by you in 2017. Do you have any comment? Is that still your view?
Yes, it is still my view. I think the term radical economic transformation is a very legitimate term that describes a program of economic transformation that is being fostered by the governing party. And properly articulated, it really should be socio-economic radical economic transformation. Yeah. So, largely because people bastardized radical economic transformation, it started mutating into rhetoric without much substance, without focusing on the real issues of socio-economic transformation that are so needed in a very practical way in our country. And it became a political type of figment and labeling that then descended into people doing really wrong things and hiding behind the shield of what they've now termed themselves to be RET forces, which have been doing things that really go against the grain and against the policy positions of the African National Congress. So they bastardized that term and have really reduced it into a lobby group, not even a lobby group, but a faction. That's what it has now become. And we need to go back to the term socio-economic transformation, which correctly depicts the policy positions of the African National Congress. And yes, we can underpin that by saying it must be radical, it must be urgent, it must be overarching. And one can package all those terms or those words around this real important program of socio-economic transformation that must be embarked upon in our country. So you had these media entities from outside our country being the ones who sort of propelled it forward, who spread it to achieve certain political objectives that advance, in my view, state capture, and that also got involved in spreading untruths about certain people, and for as long as they could do so, then that would label those people and marginalize them, and in a way even destroy them, because they would spread rumors, and we still have a measure of that, where people, either in social media or anywhere else, try to act against those that they believe are their opponents through rumor mongering, leaks in the media, to target certain groupings or individuals to achieve their own ends. And when that firm in the UK, I think it was called Pottinger, collapsed, we thought that we would go back to real political basics and shed ourselves of all those very wrong labels and go back to radical socioeconomic transformation, which is what the African National Congress should be about. Yes, at our conference, the term radical economic transformation was used, but it has been bastardized and it has been reduced to just a slogan. And what it should really be about, it should be about, in a very practical way, advancing the interests of our people.
By way of background to the next question, Mr. President, you will recall that when you testified before the chair in April this year, I asked you the following question. For yourself, Mr. President, what were the signposts along the road or along the way of the path of state capture that first alerted you to the existence of something much more than corruption? What was it for you that alerted you to the fact that state capture was a phenomenon that needed to be dealt with? And you replied that you needed to look at the various markers for yourself that indicated to you where you were. You've also said in your second statement that at some point you had to make a conscious decision. And the decision you finally made was to remain in your position and to be strategic about your intervention. We will deal with some of your interventions in due course. You also talk about the conclusion you drew in December 2015 when Mr. Nene was removed from cabinet. Minister Nene was removed from cabinet. Are you able now to say what those markers were for you? And may I just preface that question with another comment, that given the overwhelming evidence before the chair, it's really difficult to accept that people didn't know what was going on. They may have been strategic for certain reasons, but they knew. What is your comment about the signposts? What is your evidence about the signposts?
I think, yes, indeed. I mean, there were a number of signposts, and you're absolutely right. And if the impression was ever put forward that we really did not know, that would be the wrong impression, because there were signs, and there were a number of signposts that were along the way, and some of those were, for instance, with Fikile Mbalula standing up in the National Executive Committee of the ANC and saying what he said, that he got to hear about his appointment from a member of the Gupta family. Now, that startled many of us, but that was a signpost. And that, maybe we did not heed it, that it said 10 left, and we carried on, is another question, which talks to our, as I said, lack of alertness, and a few others, like the landing of the plane and all that. Now, at the Waterkloof Air Force Base. Now, what we were not fully aware of, we saw these signposts with certain anomalous actions which did not really link up to what was reasonable. But the full thread and the network of what was happening in Transnet, in Eskom, was not apparent. And that is why in my statement I said, those who were involved in the state capture project so hid their machinations. They were hidden, there were transactions at the board level and so on. And one could say, well, the media raised the issue of the locomotives and all that. And one could not immediately join the dots, because the dots quite often are disjointed, and you need to have a thread, pick it up and join all of them. So that was lacking. But some of the signposts were there. And as I said, yeah, there was the lapse, I called it, but there was also the lack of alertness. Were we complicit? The answer is no. Could we be said to have been negligent? It could well be that, but complicit we were not. Even those of us who decided to stay in the game, to, well, resist, but also to bring about the changes. The changes that we are seeing now are happening because some people decided to stay in and make strategic choices and embark on strategic actions along the way as they felt they could. Now, whether people think that the choices or the strategic actions one took were too few or not too, were too meek is the decision or the judgment they have to make. But being in the ring is what some of us prefer to do, and when you are in the ring, you're involved in a real battle. And sometimes, I should say, some of the battles that one got involved in are those that are not known. They are not apparent, because when you are in the ring, you are constantly involved in,
In punching, Mr. President.
yes. Yes.
Well, the talking about the state capture in the SOEs, that those who were involved were hiding what they were doing. I just mentioned that it will be quite important that going forward, the cabinet does things maybe differently from the way it was doing things before, whenever it was given names of CEOs and board members, because one of the things that happened at ESCOM, on the evidence that has been given here, is that somebody from outside of ESCOM, I can't remember if it was Mr. Salim Essa or one of the Gupta associates, actually sent in to ESCOM a letter saying to the chairperson of the ESCOM board at the time, Dr. Ngubane, that the board must take the following decision about the Sunday Times, the Mail and Guardian, and the City Press, which had published certain articles that they didn't like. And Dr. Ngubane took that and put it to the board, and the board agreed. So I mentioned simply because, as you said, the board members, the appointment of boards went to cabinet. Okay, Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair. You said in your answer, Mr. President, that we were not complicit. May I suggest that the we there was not the overwhelming and powerful majority, and that there was a substantial force, as you put it, contestation between the we that you say you represented and those that were actually acquiescent and supportive of the state capture project. Would you accept that?
No, I need to understand fully.
Let me put it another way.
I apologize.
When you said we were not complicit,
Yes.
you asked the rhetorical question, were we complicit?
Yes.
The answer is no, and you
Yes.
said that with assurance.
Yes.
Perhaps that might be qualified because it's overwhelmingly probable that because you were forced with others into a strategic response, there was a large proportion, perhaps even a majority of the governing party that was complicit, and the executive, that did follow the path by those who led the state capture project.
Yes, indeed. There were those who were really actively involved, and there were those who were, if you like, fence-sitters, and there were those who charted a different path.
And those who were acquiescent in the sense that they must have known what was going on, but were content to let it run its course.
Indeed.
One of the signposts that you refer to, Mr. President, in your statement is the dismissal of Mr. Nene that occurred in December 2015. And your remark in regard to that is that Mr. Nene's dismissal signalled that the process of state capture, these are your words, had now succeeded to an extent that the most strategic organ of state, Treasury, had now been captured. Perhaps a word first on the centrality of Treasury in relation to the control of state finances and their proper disbursement.
Yes.
What is your comment in that regard?
Well, Treasury is one of those key ministries in any government that is centrally placed, where it is the repository of the nation's wealth, really, of its finances, and it occupies such an important position because it really drives the financing of all the programs that government is involved in. It also drives the debt position of the country. They are actively involved day in and day out in selling our debt around the country, but it is also actively involved in accumulating the revenue that we get as a nation from taxes and a whole lot of other sources of revenue. So it plays that key role as far as I'm concerned. So well, maybe you want to get to the question first, yes.
Well, the question, if I may then, is that when such an institution of state is captured, as you say, had now been captured, it's a significant, to put it mildly, step in the execution of the state capture project. Correct?
It is.
That happened, that step was taken by whom? Who dismissed? It's an obvious question, but the name has to be named.
No, it's former President Jacob Zuma who did dismiss the minister.
Took that very important step.
Indeed.
And its significance is not lost in the evidence that is before the chair, by the chair, and obviously in your statement by yourself. Related to that and the disinformation campaign is the Operation Spiderweb report that preceded the dismissal of Mr. Nene by a few months. And that report, which emerged in the public domain, was styled an intelligence report. It was called that. I'm not saying it was necessarily an intelligence report, but what transpired is important and involves the intelligence services. The document suggested that Treasury had been captured by apartheid-era intelligence operatives as well as white monopoly capital in order to control the country's finances. When I read this document, it reminded me of a remark made by the then President Zuma about a month earlier, where he told me that there are apartheid agents within the Treasury. I recall conveying this remark to the Director General at the time, Mr. Lungisa Fuzile. I dismissed it as a conspiracy theory. However, it was clear to me that the Treasury did not enjoy the support and confidence of the President. That was Mr. Nene's evidence. Now, it's significant to link that back to your evidence about disinformation and the misuse of terms such as white monopoly capital to conceal the state capture project and to promote it. And here is an example. This is another signpost, as it were, that happened as early as July, that these tactics or strategies were in place. But what is also a matter of concern, do you know anything about that document and about attempts to understand where that document came from and who was the cause of its distribution?
Well, not so much where it came from, but just know its effect. Its effect was such that it consolidated this conspiracy theory that Treasury had been captured, and it was, being used by other forces. Now, to me, it was quite clear that this was a conspiracy, and it was false. And in the end, with the passing of time, it became clear what its effect or its consequences were really all about. Because the officials we have in Treasury are quite astute, quite loyal. They serve the interests of our country with diligence and distinction, and there was no such capturing of that entity that is so important in the life of our country. What they were doing is to do their work, and they were essentially resisting being captured. They were resisting the capture of Treasury, and somehow they needed to be painted with black paint. They needed to be, it was decided elsewhere that they should be besmashed, and their reputations should be damaged. And all now, with hindsight, it's quite clear that it was part of the machinations of state capture to dam Treasury with a view of achieving a capture process.
Before we leave the issue of the Spiderweb report, there was evidence that at the time Minister Mhlobo was the minister responsible for state security. He was approached by officials of Treasury to assist in providing information or intelligence in relation to the sources of that document. That document does seem to have the characteristics of involvement in the state capture project, as turned out in December. There was never any follow-up from state security. Do you know anything about that? Is that not a matter of concern?
No, I did not know that it was not followed up. I did know that the process of finding out an investigation was underway, but I didn't.
Well, Mr. Pretorius, I don't know whether it's that same report or another report in respect of which Dr. Lubisi says in his affidavit he had asked the DG of State Security to have investigated, to have that report investigated, and despite many reminders, he never got any feedback.
Well, it perhaps is no coincidence that when Minister Gordhan was removed from Cabinet, he was removed on the basis, it appeared, of another report that had similar characteristics, the Checkmate report. It's that report that never surfaced, except in a photograph. There was evidence about that. And the then president was approached and really avoided the topic by saying, oh, well, he can't really remember. It may have been a verbal intimation. I'm not sure whether it's the Checkmate report you're referring to, Chair.
Yeah, I can't remember, but Dr. Sibisi does deal with it in his affidavit. Of course, we, in regard to the intelligence report that was relied upon by Mr. Zuma, Dr. Dintwe did give evidence about it and said he had spoken to President Zuma and asked for it. And President Zuma had made certain undertakings. I don't know, can't remember whether one of the undertakings was that he was going to furnish it to him, but he left office without finishing it to him, and quite a long time had lapsed since he had made that undertaking to him. The period between Mr. Zuma making that undertaking to Dr. Dintwe and Mr. Zuma leaving office as president was quite a long period. That's what I do remember. So, and Dr. Dintwe's evidence was, to say the least, that it was quite, at least I think he was saying that there were question marks about the existence of such a report.
Yes. Mr. President has direct knowledge of that matter, and perhaps we can ask him to deal with it now, because it does relate to the spiderweb report.
Yeah, okay.
The point of these questions is that they were reports, in hindsight to us clearly, linked to attempts to undermine or even capture Treasury, that they were fake intelligence reports on the face of it, and that, in fact, at least one of the reports was directly used by the sitting president at the time to justify the removal, to recall Minister Gordhan from London and to justify his removal. One would have thought that an alert, committed, efficient, well-equipped as it was, intelligence network would have been able to secure information about that. After all, it doesn't appear to be the most difficult task for an intelligence agency to deal with, but I'll come to that in a moment. Perhaps we can divert for a moment to the checkmate report. You were at a meeting, as I understand your statement or your affidavit, at which the then sitting president referred to the report as justification for his dismissal for Minister Gordhan. Would you, if you could relate that to the chair, please?
Well, yes. We were at an officials meeting, ANC headquarters, when former President Zuma expressed his disquiet and unhappiness about what he thought or was advised was going to be happening during a trip, what we call an investors' roadshow trip in London and thereafter in the US by Minister Pravin Gordhan and the Deputy Minister Mcebisi Jonas, who were, together with their officials, were traveling around the world after the presentation of either the budget, I forget the timing now, or the medium-term budget statement, one of the two, which they always do once the budget or MTBP.
Probably it would have been the budget because it was in March.
Oh, yes. Then it was the budget. They always do. After the budget is presented, they travel around the world. They go to the UK, they go to the US, and in the US they go to places like New York. Thereafter they go to California and they go visit all the investors, the institutions that buy our bonds, that buy our debt, really. To explain more fully, he then told us that he's received a report that suggests that they are going to be bad-mouthing the country and the government, and he was most unhappy with that, and had given an instruction to the Director General of the government it was then Dr. Cassius Lubisi, to call them back. And when that happened, and he knows all the details, they were about a few hours before they boarded a flight to go to the United States. And he found them and said, come back. And they came back, and soon after their return. And he told us to answer your question, Mr. Pretorius, that he had an intelligence report to that effect, that they were going to say all sorts of negative things about the country and all that. And it was then that some of us vocalized or voiced our disbelief. He showed us what looked like a photographed piece of paper, I think 2 pages or 3 pages, that testified or spoke to this assertion that he had put before us. So we disputed the standing of this, and he then had taken the decision that he would remove them. It is then that.
I think in your defense, Mr. President, I think you put it a lot more strongly at the meeting, according to your statement, that you would not accept the dismissal of a minister based on this sort of, I don't know what term you used to describe it, but that was one of the occasions on which you took a stand, as it were.
Yes. I, together with others, felt that this was not the basis to dismiss a minister, let alone a finance minister and his deputy, on the basis of what we believe was a flimsy report from an intelligence source that was not part of our structures, unverified, and I felt that it was not correct to act like that, because it would just really jeopardize the standing of the country, particularly as they were going to see our bondholders in the US, and at the same time they are dismissed, they are recalled, they had to cancel appointments, recalled and come back. And I then did say, we are going to be asked about this. And when we are asked about this, we will have to speak out against it. He nodded and said, yes, he knows that we will be asked. And I made it a point to say, I will be speaking out against it. So what ensued thereafter was, I was on a trip, a work trip to the Free State, and as soon as I landed, there were journalists waiting, and I then made my statement. Thereafter, the national chairperson of the ANC at the time, he was the Secretary General, he also made a statement, and the then Treasurer General also spoke against this. This was, to me, a moment of great alarm. Something that should never have happened had happened, and I felt I needed to take a stand on this issue.
This was, of course, a few months after you had had a discussion with the Deputy Secretary General of the party, where in December 2010, December 2015, when you told her that you were contemplating resigning.
Yes.
As a result of the appointment of Mr. Desmond Royal.
Yes.
So this happened a few months in March.
Indeed, yeah, it happened.
Okay.
Just for the time sequence, we'll go back to it now. Mr. Neni's dismissal occurred on the 9th of December 2015. Minister Gordon's removal on the basis of the checkmate report, purportedly, happened in 2017.
Yes, 17.
Now, you'd concluded in December 2015, as you say, Treasury had now been captured. You've told the chair about the centrality of Treasury to the control of state expenditure and its centrality to the process of state capture, or the state capture project. You intervened, and your intervention, certainly in relation to the appointment of former Minister van Rooyen, was successful. It was at that stage that Minister Gordon was appointed.
Yes, it was.
So it seems that your intervention at that stage, strategic or otherwise, did have an effect. What else did you do after December 2015? I mean, you're now successful in your intervention. What other interventions were there? 2017 is a long way down the line. Yes. Again, your intervention appears to be, you took a firm stand, and, well, it didn't have the desire. Minister Gordon was not retained. So I suppose in that sense the intervention did not have the effect of setting aside Minister Gordon's removal. But the point I'm making is, weren't there occasions for other interventions that you feel free to talk about to the chair?
And I guess some might not be acts of intervention, Mr. President, but maybe acts of resistance of state capture.
Yes. In other words, getting back to the question, what you knew and what did you do with that knowledge? Yes. In concrete terms.
Yes. You know, someone this morning sent me a quotation from someplace, and he said, "The strongest people are not those who show strength in front of us, but those who win battles we know nothing about." I found that to be quite profound, because what may seem like there were only a few instances, it's what is apparent, but there are a whole host of a number of other, if you like, battles that one got engaged in quietly and silently to bring about the change that we are today seeing. I mean, there are quite a number. I remember once there was an attempt to set up a commission of inquiry into the banks, largely after one bank or so had closed the account of one company, a Gupta-related company. And the view was that set up a commission of inquiry because there was collusion in the way they acted without actually really proving it, and it was supposed to be a judicial commission of inquiry. And some of us said that would be the wrong thing to do, because immediately one of the strongest institutions that we have in our country, in our economy, is one of the best banking systems in the world. You would then subject it to this type of commission of inquiry, which would immediately get even the investing world from outside the country to lose confidence in our banking system, because sometimes, or mostly, that's what attracts people to invest in South Africa. They look at our key indicators and say one of the key indicators is, of course, a beautiful country, it's a great climate, and it's got a good constitution, strong independent judiciary, and a banking sector that is quite advanced and modern and one of the best 3 or so in the world. So we argued that that would be the worst thing we could do. We should instead just find out exactly why these accounts are being closed. So it looked like a sledgehammer was going to be used to kill a mosquito. So there was a very strong push, a strong thrust to have this commission, and we resisted that, and a number of others. And there were quite a number of instances where, quietly, like this quotation says, that it is those battles that we know nothing about, but there were battles, in some in committee, some in discussion, some in various forums. And that's where I say there was no complicity. There was just the process of saying, we've got to turn this ship around. And it was like almost turning the Titanic around, because it takes its own time. But we were convinced and convicted that it will be turned around. And I'm rather glad to be around to see that we are turning it around and we are repositioning this ship so that it can start sailing in the right direction in the service of our people and in the interests of our people.
The occasion of the closure of the Oak Bay bank accounts is another occasion when you, quote, took a stand, unquote, and I'd like to deal with that separately in due course, because it relates to another issue, and that's how Cabinet operates. But it does seem, if I may just quote Dr. Dintwe's evidence in relation to the Checkmate report. He says, I'm sitting with the President. He says, when time is right, I will explain to yourself. I hear people saying there is a report somewhere. That report may not be existent, because as the President, sometimes I get verbal reports, but I never wanted to conclude that the report was non-existent because he said it may not be existent. That's Dr. Dintwe's comment. It seems to me a vastly different picture painted there by Dr. Dintwe's narrative of his meeting with the President, where he says that the existence of the report was all but denied in your evidence, where the report was actually shown at a meeting. Well, that, notwithstanding our state security establishment's best efforts, and I put that in inverted commas.
You want to clarify, Mr. Pretorius, that where you are reading from, Dr. Dintwe is referring to...
Dr. Dintwe's evidence.
Mr. Zuma and not the current president.
No, Mr. Zuma.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, the former president. I'm sitting with a... No, that's important, Chair, because there's a public out there.
Because there's a reference to president and to president.
Yes. No, you're quite correct, Chair, with respect. Dr. Dintwe was relating a meeting, the contents of a meeting with the former president about the Checkmate report. And the point of that is that it seems to relate to or narrate a completely different version of the existence or otherwise of the Checkmate report as to what you observed yourself in that meeting. And of course, to return to the point I'm making, despite the best efforts, and I put that in inverted commas, of our security establishment, the origins of the Checkmate report and the Spiderweb report, which in retrospect were significant because they have the features of the state capture project, as you've related, were never discovered. We may get back then to the question arising. I trust that it's not going to be another mystery, at least so far as it's necessary, as to what you did after 3 years of commission work, after Nenegate, but after the dismissal of Minister Nene. But there are 3 incidents at least where you did feel empowered with some effect, to good effect, to take stand. The dismissal of Minister Nene, the dismissal of Minister Gordhan, and the closure of the Oak Bay bank accounts and Cabinet's involvement and the degree of Cabinet's involvement therein. Were there not other occasions that you can relate to the Chair about where you felt it possible and desirable to intervene? Because a lot was happening.
Yes, I want to scratch my head. There were a number of occasions, really, on a whole host of issues. And may I say that some of those either occurred in Cabinet, some occurred elsewhere in usual interactions, and some had to do with either appointments of people who one felt were not the best that could be appointed. So many things. In a situation like that, many things are always on the go, and many things are always happening that you have to have your antenna up to pick them up as they go on.
What would you say, Mr. President, if you were asked, as you are being asked, I can't shy away from it, that either the forces behind and controlled by the former president were so strong that they compelled only limited, very strategic responses. Because many were complicit either through silence or cooperation in the state capture project. Or it wasn't so, that there was a substantial and significant part of the executive that were not complicit, that were in opposition to the state capture project. Substantial amount of the party were complicit. Why was the opposition not more vocal and not more frequent? Why was it simply these isolated incidents? If you were asked that question, and I am asking it, what would your answer be?
Well, I would suppose that many of the colleagues who might not have agreed with some of the things that were happening chose to be strategic, to be so strategic and work within the system to bring about the changes. And as I said, and some people may deride this, but as I said, one had a number of choices, and even if they are not here to articulate those choices that they had open to them, it objectively means that they had those choices, and they opted. Those who were not in favor of going along with the whole process of state capture, they opted to be strategic and in a way to choose their battles. And in a way, as they chose their battles, we know not some of the battles that they won, because there were those type of battles that were fought. And I guess the only badge they would wear is that they were not complicit. But your suggestion is that they were complicit through their silence. I would actually disagree with it.
Well, It is with hindsight, but it does seem to be a reasonable and logical conclusion from all the evidence, including your evidence, is that the former president was firmly in control. What he did was known. And the fact of the state capture project, or rampant corruption, however one wants to term it, at the hands of members of the executive, SOEs, and other sectors of our society, all that was known, and that those that opposed it were in the position you described. They were compelled to be strategic in their responses because they knew if they spoke out and were any more vocal than they were, they would be removed or dismissed or however dealt with. The implication of that is that the ruling party under Mr. Zuma was the governing, effective, well, majority may be the wrong word, but it was in control. It wasn't an aberrance or a mistake. It was actually what was running the country. It was the government of the day.
That is certainly true. The ANC was in control. It was the governing party, which means it was in control. As it is now, and there were a number of people who frankly did not go along with this, and some who did differ were replaced, may not have appeared like they were dismissed, but they were replaced if it didn't go along. And a number of my colleagues felt that they should be strategic, they should do things that will advance the interests of the people as a whole. And what I am able to once again repeat here is that their silence or inaction should never be construed as having been complicit. It was, you worked in a big superstructure that was given to move in a particular direction, and so therefore you had to be strategic, you had to choose your moments, and it's just like in any situation, you speak out, and at the right moment when you feel that what you want to say will have an impact, or you do things when you know that they will have an impact. So the criticism that people just sat there to safeguard their own positions and did nothing, I think it's a bit too harsh. There are indications, and some of them may not be that obvious to everyone, of things that they did, battles that they won, which we don't know about. But the important thing is that were they complicit? Not everyone was complicit.
Well, we're at 3:10, and bearing in mind the understanding that we will finish at 4, and then the President might want to say something. Let me raise this issue, Mr. President. What is there in terms of our systems now, and maybe the systems of the governing party, that would make people react to another episode of state capture differently from the way they did with regard to the first one. And I ask that because while there may be arguments for and against about strategic decisions as to how to deal with the situation, and while it might not be easy to say this choice was totally wrong, this was the one that was totally right, while it might not be easy to say that, the fact of the matter is we do know that between 2010, 2011, and I think beginning of 2018 or 2017, on the evidence that has been given here by Mr. Holden on the money flows, the Guptas and their entities were able to access about 57 billion rand of taxpayers' money. So even if one were not to criticize a particular option that may have been taken, one wants to say what would be the best and most effective way in which another episode would need to be dealt with by different stakeholders. Would the options that were made in regard to the first one, be the best to be adopted? Or are we in a position where if a second episode were to happen, pretty the same thing would happen? What would you like to say, Mr. President?
Chairperson, I think we've reached a watershed moment. The release, let me start off with the establishment of the commission was a crossroads for us. And we either established the commission or we didn't. I hold the belief that if we didn't establish the commission, we would have continued to waddle in a situation where corruption continued unabated, in the dark, much as I think the public protector had already revealed portions of it. But the crossroads we reached was that we chose the right path. And the right path was to establish this commission. Because this commission has given us the moment of truth. It's a watershed moment. We've arrived at a juncture, an important juncture, to a point, and it's a defining moment for us, to a point where I don't ever envisage in our continuing journey of our democracy that we should and will have another state capture moment. So I see this as the one and last state capture occasion or moment for us. And we've hit rock bottom as a country, as a nation, and the only way must be up. We must rid ourselves of the vestiges of state capture, and it'll take us some time, and this is where we need to work together. Every one of us as South Africans, rid ourselves of this cancer of corruption. And in doing so, as I said earlier, for us who are part of the governing party, it starts in the party. It starts in the party, how we renew ourselves and foster the renewal process, how we strengthen our own internal processes in the African National Congress. Because when we do so, that is what then strengthens the government. The Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, Ms. Jessie Duarte, was telling me that she has had interaction with the Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese have said to her, we'd like to work with you as you have embarked on a path that we also traversed. And we started, as you are, with renewing the party, taking corrective measures in the party, and thereafter we use that as a platform to reform government, to correct things in government. And they add another one, which I rather like. The third one is to strengthen the laws, to strengthen the regulations on a continuous basis to make sure that this never happens. So in the party, we're renewing the party, and seriously so. And may I add that in the past, yes, there was a lot of talk, but in the later parts or the earlier parts of this year, we've started to demonstrate to ourselves and to all and sundry that we are serious about dealing with corruption. We're strengthening our structures. We're strengthening structures such as, our Integrity Commission, which is a very important and, may I add, powerful body within the structures of the ANC. And our disciplinary processes are now becoming more and more robust. And in doing so, we changing ourselves. There's a metamorphosis that is underway within our party, a very positive one. Thereafter, it is government, and I'll talk about it later as we conclude, a number of steps that we are taking. So, Chairperson, and then we'll deal with the laws. But Chairperson, what I am essentially saying is that what is it that people of South Africa can look forward to, doubtful as a number of them may be rather, it is a renewed, reformed and rejuvenated party that is in government. And of course, the joyous burden we have is that we still retain a great deal of support amongst our people, and therefore we've got to cleanse ourselves and make ourselves more presentable to the people of the country. And that, if it sounds like a promise, I would like to depict it more as a reality in the making. That this is becoming real, as evidenced by the steps we are taking, not only in the ANC, but in the state as well. Some of the steps, which may not be apparent to everyone, are the reality. I very much, and I referred to it in my statement, I very much appreciated an analyst who was able to look very closely through the looking glass or microscope at some of the interventions we've made, and that's J.P. Landman, who takes time to scrutinize everything that we are doing. And rather than react to the headlines, look at the changes that are underway, and concludes that change is taking place, even as many would be dismissive and even be insulting, which they are entitled to. But he argues that the wheels of change are underway. And I want to testify to that. And I want to touch on that a little bit as I close. So change is happening. It may be slower than what people would like to see happening, but we reached a watershed moment, and we're changing, and it's irrevocable change. We will change because we must.
Thank you. Mr. Pretorius?
Chair, I'd like nothing more than to hear firm instruction to sit down after 3 years, but I do have 40 minutes left, if I may.
No. Continue, Mr. Pretorius.
One issue that you deal with, and you've touched on it in your evidence, is the manner in which Cabinet functions. Given that it is the highest executive decision-making body that governs our country, it's an important matter. Mr. Mamoniat of Treasury presented the Commission with a long affidavit, and he dealt, amongst other things, with Cabinet, and he analyses the 3 occasions on which Cabinet made very, very important decisions. One was the nuclear deal in December 2009. The other was the appointment of the Commissioner of SARS in 2014. And the other was the decision to intervene to the extent that it ultimately did in relation to the closure of the Oak Bay accounts. And he draws a common denominator there, that on each occasion, the disciplined and lengthy procedures ordinarily followed by Cabinet by way of preparation were not followed. These were 3 what are referred to as walk-in matters. So without the benefit of 2 weeks of preparation, proper documentation, proper research, proper information, Cabinet was presented with a decision to go ahead with the nuclear deal, at least issue requests for proposals, subject to certain conditions, for an amount that was in the trillions, 3 times our gross domestic product. The decision to intervene to protect the interests of a private family, the closure of the bank accounts matter, and an important issue, the appointment of Commissioner of SARS, which in the context of your evidence in 2014 was a very important step. What is your comment on what quite frankly Mr. Mamoniat describes as an abuse of the Cabinet process in order to get very important decisions by?
Yes, there was a process where Cabinet processes were both abused and misused. And they resulted in very important matters, just arriving, if I can use that word colloquially, arriving in Cabinet and being presented, to be more precise, to Cabinet without proper processing, without the normal gestation period that various matters go through, where matters are properly discussed and properly canvassed after having been researched properly, the Cabinet memo being properly drafted with all the attachments that bear testimony or evidence to what needs to be put before Cabinet, and then Cabinet committee discusses, and thereafter it then gets into the Cabinet system. So the ones that Mr. Pretorius has alluded to went under the fence, under that fence, and that could have led to various real difficulties and challenges for the country. And you want to know what else some of us were able to do to either change things. This is one of them. For instance, the nuclear deal, which I could have mentioned, but it slipped my mind. And Treasury played a very critical role because we said this matter needs to be properly researched by Treasury and the fundability thereof to see whether we as a nation can afford this. And the work that they did at the instance of a number of people, including ourselves, was that then resulted in a conclusion that this would be just too far expensive for us. So those are some of the areas where, yes, cabinet processes abuse. What are we doing about it? We now have a cabinet process and system that will prevent that from happening. Matters that have to be presented to cabinet have to be properly canvassed. There are those that are termed the presidential contemporary issues, but those are matters that, by virtue of their importance and urgency, can be tabled under that topic, and is usually what the president puts forward, but not substantial, money-laden propositions. So the new, and it's not really new, but it's a continuation of that cabinet process which we are now insisting needs to be adhered to. And that process is now fixed in stone. So those things slipped under the fence.
Thank you, Mr. President. The matter you referred to earlier, Chair, relating to Dr. Lubisi.
Oh, yes.
That dealt with the, I can just get the affidavit. It appears in bundle 3 at page 172. The cabinet memorandum that cabinet considered at the time of the closure of the bank accounts issue being raised in cabinet, that cabinet memorandum was leaked to the media.
Oh, yes, that was the matter.
And there was quite a controversy about the circumstances under which that occurred. Dr. Lubisi then had a meeting with the then Director General of State Security, Mr. Arthur Fraser, and asked that the leak be investigated and a report be provided to Dr. Lubisi. But no such report was ever forthcoming. That, I think, is what you're referring to. Do you have any comment on that series of events? Apparently that cabinet memorandum was leaked.
It was one of those spurious events where a cabinet memo was leaked. Yes, it was investigated, but the report never came.
Yeah, a mystery that we will have to live with.
If you could come back to the mic, Mr. President.
I apologize.
You spoke away from it, so I did not hear.
Chair,
Not hear. If you could repeat your answer.
Yes. I was saying that it was one of those spurious events where a CAB memo was leaked, and we've never really had such in our cabinet system. But all of a sudden, this one was leaked, and it was leaked to achieve a particular end and a particular narrative, which was being directed from somewhere.
Yes, there has been much evidence about the closure of the bank accounts issue and Cabinet's involvement, but it is rather extraordinary, is it not, that Cabinet should be called to get involved in a matter of really private interests, even though there might have been a public element involved. Do you agree?
I agree with that. It was rather strange to us that the whole Cabinet was subjected to a process of discussing the closure of a bank account. It is one of those where we raised the concern and the alarm, and where it was suggested that the best way to deal with it was to establish a commission of inquiry, which would have had a negative impact on the economy, as it would have negatively impacted the interest of investors and our bondholders in our economy. So it is one of those that one can cite as having diverted, if you like.
Thank you. In relation to a question that the Chair asked earlier about the future intentions in relation to issues discussed in evidence, Mr. President, there are a number of reforms that you set out in paragraph 168 of your statement, which include matters of policy, legislation, and administration. Do you wish to comment on any of those? Perhaps take a minute or so to place them on record.
Where do you pick that up? I know where they are.
Para 168, I'll get the further.
Oh, it is, yes. 168, it's quite a long paragraph. We detail, I should get closer to the mic.
I guess, Mr. Pretorius, the President can emphasize those that he wishes to emphasize.
If you do wish to emphasize, you've referred to a number of them. I just wanted to give you that opportunity should you wish to use it. And then there's just one other issue.
I'd like to emphasize a number of them because they really speak to the changes that we are, if you like, enforcing, engendering, changing in government, whilst many would think or suppose that not much is being done. There is a lot that we are doing, and most of it is really addressing the capture of the state that we've been through. For instance, what we are seeking to do is to strengthen the capacity of the state. And this one is a more long-term process, and it is underpinned by a whole lot of other initiatives that we are embarking on in terms of how the institutions of the state should function. But one of the really wonderful and innovative changes that we have brought about is we've always had a school of government where government civil servants are trained, but we've transformed that, and it is a school of government where I also can attend. In a way, borrowed from the, if you like, the Chinese model, where even cabinet ministers every year have to go to school, and I have great pride in saying that's what I'd like to do, go to school. So our school of government is coming up with very clear policies, modules that all of us will be put through, and that relates also to local government level. And we are also continuing to change and ensuring that there's greater coordination and transparency in government. The level of transparency we want to deepen, and so that all and sundry can see that we are going to change this. The performance agreements of ministers have been made public, and we've provided copies of that to yourselves. And another important change, Chair, is professionalizing the public service. And this in itself is going to talk to ridding us of the state capture culture, where we expect our civil servants to be well qualified for the work they do, well trained and well experienced and well prepared. And we will also be ridding our government system of political patronage, because state capture was also about patronage, where people were employed because they knew so and so, or they were employed because they had to do the bidding of the state capturers. So we are working on that and changing that. We are going to make the public service and local government administrators careers of choice. We're going to cascade downwards as well to local government. Our local government sector is in very much need of transformation and complete reform, and we'll be doing so. The intergovernmental coordination, we've instituted what we call the district development model, which is confirming in some ways what has also been done in a number of areas, but we are institutionalizing it at government level so that we should get rid of the silo mentality. See, state capture found fertile ground in a silo type of work, where they were able to plant their people all around, but had the institutions working in a silo manner, and they were the only common denominator themselves in all this. So what we are seeking to do is to have a district development model which breaks down the silos and enables our government structures to work both horizontally as well as vertically. The whole lot of processes, we're reintroducing the policy and research unit in the presidency, which was gotten rid of. Our law enforcement is now going to be much greater focus, as well as security. So, Chairperson, the processes that we are now involved in are vast, they are deep. The reform and reclaiming of SARS, which is a very important government agency from the capture that it had been subjected to, is a very important process of change and transformation that we have instituted since this administration has been in office. So those who might think that not much has been done and achieved, I keep saying, but watch this space, not in the future, but now, as it is unfolding, and I guess we will be more turbocharged when this commission finishes its work, because it is, as it is meant to come up with a whole range of proposals that we will want to implement. And I see us as a country, much as we may have enormous challenges at present, of an economic nature, social nature, health nature, but we are a country that is going to rise from the mess that state capture subjected us to. And I think right now, compared to what we had a few years ago, we are in a much better position. And this is where I would call upon South Africans that let us all be part of their solution as we move forward, rather than bemoan what has happened in the past. Of course, we must use the past so that the past is never repeated. And this is exactly where I believe we should be as a nation and the direction that we should move in. I think we are getting better positioned. We are not yet where we ought to be. I can say that without any equivocation. But we are better placed now in that we are moving forward rather than backwards. We are moving forward rather than sideways. I have great confidence in the ability of the people in the state structures. But I would also like to say, also want to invest and store my belief in the people of our country as a whole, including those in the private sector, because they too have a very important role because the private sector, Chair, also played a very big role in state capture. Not collectively, but there were certain elements of the private sector that aided and abetted where we got to. And they too have a responsibility to make sure that we do rise from this mess that our country was subjected to.
Mr. Pretorius.
If I may just deal briefly with two issues. Mr. President, one of the features of the period under review was the demise of an active and well-capacitated anti-corruption task team, which was in effect gutted and reduced to really a shell during the period under review. You talk in your reforms, paragraph 211 of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. Very briefly, what is envisaged?
What we envisage through this, Chair, and we'll continue talking about this also into the future, is to see corruption as it has manifested itself was an affront to the people of South Africa. There is not a single person that you can talk to in South Africa who is in favor of corruption, except those who participate in it. And even they will find different ways of labeling it. And given that corruption militates against the interests of our people, we thought that we should set up a structure that is going to involve the citizenry of our country so that we can promote and encourage active citizenry, but we can also, through that, also promote whistleblowing, because one of the things that was damaged was this process of people blowing the whistle and say, there's something wrong that's happening. So those who would blow the whistle started, receding, fearing, because those who blew the whistle were badly dealt with. They were dealt with harshly. They were either suspended, they were either railroaded out of their jobs, and some suffered immensely to a point where they lost their jobs and didn't have, income for their own livelihoods. So we want to promote that people should feel free to whistleblow. And we need to have more robust policies on whistleblowing so that we can protect whistleblowers. There should be more transparency in society. And we should also advance professionalism within our own structures. Now, that is the strategy, and I'm just really being very brief. That is the strategy broadly, but we should also get civil society structures involved in the forum. And the forum must be an active forum of not only people in government. We should have people outside of government who will work with us. So we launched this forum, and we're looking forward to the forum doing its work, because it will have a number of committed stakeholders as part of it. So what this means is that we're now beginning to deal with issues of corruption much more seriously. And we will have many more eyes rained on what we do in government, so that the incidents of state capture should never, ever happen again. And this is what gives me confidence about not having state capture rearing its head. In the health sector, we set up that type of forum as well. So, Chairperson, I think, given what I've just said and a whole lot of other things, we will be able to have a better handle on incidents of corruption going forward. And this will help us also to transform our laws. Another important area which I'd also touch on in my statement is reforming our procurement system. Because it is in procurement where, as they say, not everyone who is in government is a crook, but all the crooks tend to go to focus on procurement because that's where the money is. So we need to transform that and make sure that we reposition so that procurement takes place much more transparently. People must see what their monies are being spent on. And I've seen that in a number of environments where one visits, in some cases, every cent that is spent is clearly delineated and the citizenry is able to see that this is where our money goes. We see it right at the local level and right up as well. And we therefore need to use as many initiatives and strategies to address this demon of corruption.
Well, I'm happy, Mr. President, you have touched on some of the matters that I also regard as very important if our fight as a country against corruption is to stand any chance of success. Because I've said here that the protection of whistleblowers is crucial because they play a very important role. And if we don't have proper protection for them, then our fight against corruption will be weakened in a very serious way. Two changes to procurement would be also very crucial. And three, the identification of the right people to occupy positions, certain strategic positions in SOEs and government departments, the criteria for the appointment of members of boards of SOEs, what type of people should be appointed, the processes which lead to their identification and appointment. All of those things are going to be crucial if we are to stand any chance of putting up a good fight against corruption. So I'm happy that you're mentioning more or less the same things.
Two issues remain. I'm not sure we'll have time to deal with both of them, Chair, but
yes,
you have been pretty insistent and consistent in asking each senior official or member of the executive who comes before you to detail their association or otherwise with the Gupta family. That is contained in the President's statement. I don't know if you wish to rely on that or wish him to deal with it.
Well, he dealt with it briefly yesterday, but to the extent that there might be things that he might not have dealt with, it might be important for transparency that he deals with it as well. But as I said yesterday, he did deal with it. I'm not sure whether there is much to add.
Mr. President, it's in Bundle 2, page 8.
Would that be a bundle that would be behind him? I think somebody will...
I'm sure I'll find it.
One of the earlier bundles.
It would be written on the spine, Mr. President.
Yes, I will find it.
Bundle 2, okay, all right.
It's an affidavit that you gave to the Commission some time ago.
Oh, yeah. I should recall. I can't see it immediately, but that's fine.
You gave it in 2019 in July, and
Yes,
the reference you may look for is paragraph 4.
yes.
If you have anything to add to your evidence yesterday, you want to.
Oh, well,
No, I thought you were
it's
going to read it so
it's
that
a
I-
few
No, no.
paragraphs, Mr.
I'm happy to
Pretorius.
read it if you
Maybe you
prefer.
can read them to you, Mr. President.
Yes.
It's a few paragraphs.
Because I don't see it immediately here. But, no fault of
Okay,
yours.
maybe my registrar must assist you, Mr. President. He will come and assist you.
I think Mr.
Oh, Mr. Pretorius is offering his bundle.
You're very kind this afternoon. Or this minute only.
That's noted, Mr. President.
Which paragraph?
Paragraph 4.
Yes. Yes. Do you want me to comment?
If you have any comment to add to what you said yesterday in evidence,
No.
it's up to you.
No, I don't have any further comment.
Yeah, no, I think he is right. I've just quickly looked at the paragraphs. He's, in substance, what he said yesterday is what is in the paragraphs.
Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
because it's paragraphs, paragraph 4, 4.1 up to 4.4. After that, he discusses something else.
Okay, and
Yes.
then just finally, if I can place on record, we did prepare to deal with issues related to the affidavit of Mr. Nkwinti and matters related to the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform. They are a matter of record and simply don't have time to deal with them. But it's not through omission.
Mr. Pretorius, I'm not sure what you were saying. I was attending to.
Yes,
getting
there was
that
one
file
issue
out.
that we
Yes.
had prepared as a legal team to deal with,
Yes.
but simply don't have time to deal with it. It's a collateral issue to
Yeah,
many of the
okay,
issues discussed,
okay,
and
okay.
it- to do with land affairs.
Okay.
I just wanted to place that on.
Of course, if there is a matter that is important that you have not been able to cover, it would remain open to the legal team subsequent to today to ask the President to comment on.
Thank you, Chair. We will reduce those questions to writing and
Yeah.
present them to the President's office so that there is in fact no omission.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay, okay. Would those be your questions then?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. President.
Mr. President, I understand you wish to say something at this stage before we conclude.
Well, yes, I do, and it really, most part of it will be just to thank you, Chairperson, once again for the opportunity to make the statement. I did come with a measure of trepidation to be subjected to your questioning and the questioning of the evidence leaders. And I leave here with many scars and with blood dripping below my clothes. But nonetheless, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity of being able to present largely part of what we've been through. And in a way, despite the evidence that has been presented before the Commission, and despite the excellent work by many, one would say, investigators, your investigators, academics, as well as the really, truly outstanding journalists in our country. What is true, Mr. Chairman, is that we may never really finally know the true and the real costs to our country of state capture, because figures abound. There are stated in various quarters. But what we do know is that it ran into billions. We may be able to establish how much of public funds have been stolen, by how much costs in terms of goods and services may have been inflated because the goods and services that had to be procured were inflated to extract rents and to extract those bribes and kickbacks. And also what it has cost to investigate these cases and also to prosecute those who are responsible. It may be possible to quantify the infrastructure and services that could have been provided to the people of our country with the funds that were stolen and wasted as a result of state capture. It's something that we should be able to compute in one way or another. We could quantify this in terms of, say, hospital beds, commuter trains, the houses that we could have built, and the social grants that we could have offered to our people, water, reticulation, maintenance of our roads, and a whole number of public goods that state capture robbed our people. But what is more difficult to measure is the broader cost to our economy and to our society broadly. It is difficult to measure the effect of state capture on business and consumer confidence, on the loss of investment, because the state capture also had an overarching impact on our ability to attract investment, because as investors looked at us as a country, they just saw a country that is mired in corruption, a state that has been captured by a particular family. And nobody wants to invest in a country like that, where one family runs everything in the body politic of the country. We similarly cannot quantify the impact of state capture on our standing internationally and our image, because state capture damaged that image, and our standing is something that is often talked about, just like our standing now recently following the unrest that we had. It was damaged, and we have to go through perhaps years to repair the image that we've always had. Now, what state capture, as I said earlier, also did was led to the departure of public service, from the public service of highly qualified people, experienced people, and either because they refused to be part of it, or they presented a threat to those who were part of such activities. It is likely, Chairperson, that state capture also discouraged many talented young people from joining government, which has significant implications to the public service of tomorrow. And what we seek to do now is to represent government service to the people of our country, especially young people, and call upon them to come and serve their nation and their government. And we want to make government service something that is attractive to young people. By weakening our security forces, which was another area as we spoke about, as well as law enforcement agencies, the actions associated with state capture place the security and the integrity of our country at risk. Perhaps the most devastating and lasting cost of state capture and corruption is its effect on the confidence of the people of South Africa in the leaders and officials in whom they placed so much trust and confidence and responsibility. So state capture has damaged people's confidence in the rule of law, in public institutions, in law enforcement agencies, and even to some extent in the democratic process. That is what makes the work of this commission so important and so essential. The people of our country look to this commission, Chair, to uncover the truth, as you've demonstrated ever since you've been at your work, that you are uncovering the truth. They also look to this commission to identify those who are responsible and to recommend measures that should be taken against those who are responsible, as well as to ensure that we prevent state capture from ever happening again. It is a vital part of our broader process of reckoning this moment of decision, of acknowledging mistakes and ensuring accountability. Now, as a young democracy, it is vital that we are willing and prepared to confront mistakes that we have made and correct them. The work of this commission will help us, as it must, to make a clear and decisive break with the corrupt practices that have cost our country so much. It is important to acknowledge that we would not have reached this point, that this commission would not be sitting now had it not been for the determined actions of South Africans, many of whom marched in the streets of our country, protesting against corruption and demanding clean government, which they are entitled to. It was the people of this country who, in their various formations, stood up to what they saw as acts of gross wrongdoing and abuse of power. They were not prepared to allow their hard-won democracy to be eroded for the wealth of their nation, rather, to be squandered. And in so doing, they demonstrated that despite the damage caused by state capture, our democracy remains robust and resilient. They have shown the value of our Constitution, the institutions that support our democracy, our independent judiciary, our free media, our vibrant civil society, and our active citizenry. The experience has also shown that within our state-owned entities, within our public service, within parliament, legislature, and councils, there are men and women of integrity and capability, people who resisted the pressure on them to participate in wrongdoing or to be willing accomplices to all the wrong things that were happening. It is the essential honesty and decency of these people, Chairperson, and indeed of South Africans across society, that will enable us to rebuild and to recover. I applaud the commitment and courage of many witnesses who appeared before this commission to give an account of what went wrong. And some did so with a great deal of trepidation themselves, at great risk to reveal themselves, while there have been certainly been systematic failures, governance lapses, or errors. The fundamental reality, Chair, is that state capture happened because certain individuals each made a deliberate decision to engage in acts of corruption and criminality. It is just, correct, and necessary that they face the consequences of their actions. Having borne witness to the crimes of state capture, the worst thing we can do is to allow it to ever happen again. We have a shared responsibility as a people to leave the era of state capture firmly behind us and to act together to prevent corruption in all its forms. This means, amongst other things, that we must reinforce the checks and the balances within our democratic dispensation that are meant to prevent the abuse of power. We must also strengthen our institutions that were established to support democracy and effectively capacitate our law enforcement agencies. We need to safeguard the freedom, the independence, and the diversity of our media. We must professionalize the public service, and we must also attract skilled and professionally inclined people back into the public service. And as I said earlier, we also need, I want to put it in my concluding statement, we need to give whistleblowers the protection that you also spoke about, Chair. Because without whistleblowers, we will not be able to tackle corruption effectively. And those who would want to participate in corruption should know that other people will blow the whistle and that those whistleblowers' word will be heeded. And so therefore we must protect them in law and in practice. We need to entrench a new approach to the funding of political parties so that no party should ever get tempted to want to raise funding in ways that are going to raise a number of questions. We need to protect the judiciary from interference and ensure that the courts of our country continue to be accessible to all South Africans. But more importantly, as a nation, we've signed a contract amongst ourselves to say the judiciary will, in effect, be the final arbiters of the disputes that we will continue to have amongst us. And once they have made their judgment, that should be the judgment that we abide by. Above all, we need to celebrate and encourage active citizenship, for that is our greatest defense against the abuse of power, against the theft of public resources. In my statement to the Commission and in the course of my testimony, Chair, I have sought to indicate my personal knowledge of the events under investigation, the decisions that I took, and the considerations that informed those decisions. And as a person who occupied a position of authority during the state capture, or rather the state capture era, I must say I take full responsibility for the choices that I made myself and the actions that I took. I will not run away from those decisions. I have also sought to outline some of the measures this administration has taken to end state capture. I articulated quite a number of those in my opening statement and have reiterated here that we are taking corrective measures to obliterate state capture, and that it will take time, but we are going to stay the course. The progress that has been made over the last 2.5 years should, I hope, stand as a testament to my own commitment and the commitment of the administration that I lead to deal decisively with corruption and state capture. Finally, I wish to express, Chair, on behalf of myself and on behalf of all South Africans, sincere gratitude to the Commission, to the evidence leaders, to the staff of the Commission, and finally to yourself for the great service that you are doing to our nation. And as a country, we are emerging from a difficult period. Together, we have chosen a path of rebuilding, a path of renewal, a path of transparency, a path of accountability, also a path of justice and the rule of law. Now, I have every confidence, Chair, that no matter what the challenges are that lie ahead, that we will walk this path together and we will prevail. And Chair, I'd like to thank you personally. You and I have discussed the various logistical challenges and various matters where you've wanted to elongate the life of the Commission because you were still doing work and needed more money. And I do believe that the money that has been spent has been well spent. And I look forward to receiving the report and want to thank you once again for allowing me to come to the Commission. It was not an easy decision for a sitting head of state to come and subject themselves to questioning in the Commission. Even my fellow heads of state in the region questioned me and said, why would you do such a thing? A head of state going to be questioned? And I said, something really wrong happened in our country. And to put it right, I've got to go as the head of state. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your concluding statement. I must also take this opportunity to thank you, Mr. President, for the support that you have given to the work of the Commission throughout the life of the Commission. You have indicated that I had to, from time to time, approach you because there were funding challenges for the Commission, and yet the Commission still needed to do its work. And I must say that whenever I have done so, Mr. President, I have found great cooperation from you, and your support for the work of the Commission has been very clear, and that has been very important to the Commission, to the Commission as a whole. We appreciate it very much. We might not have got as much as we wanted each time, but that is the nature of budgeting and so on. You don't always get everything, but nevertheless, we got a lot of support from you, Mr. President. We got a lot of support from the Ministry of Justice. We got support from Treasury as well. So we appreciate that very much. I must also take this opportunity to thank the members of the Commission's legal team. I must also thank the members of the investigation team, and I must thank the various persons who have been secretaries or acting secretaries of the Commission over the past 3.5 years. I must thank all the staff of the Commission for the wonderful work that all of them have done to make sure that the work of the Commission was done successfully. We have had a long time when we even had night sessions to try and expedite the work of the Commission, and throughout, everyone who was asked to work in the evenings, to work over weekends, sometimes overtime, they all gave support. And I know that the members of the legal team and the investigation team, there have been times in the life of the Commission when they really sacrificed a lot and worked during months when there was no certainty about funding, but they were very committed to the work of the Commission. And funding would come late, but they did not leave. They continued. I just want to express my appreciation for all of those sacrifices. I must also thank various lawyers who assisted witnesses and implicated persons who appeared before the Commission. I must thank various witnesses and implicated persons who made themselves available to give their versions, to avail themselves for questioning. We thank all of them. I must say, Mr. President, that our plan was that you as the President should be the last witness. But certain things happened recently which may require that I make some decisions in regard to certain applications, and by law I must decide them in accordance with what is expected. I will consider them properly and decide them. But our plan was exactly what I have said. But of course, if an application that is properly motivated is placed before me, I've got to apply my mind to it properly. I can't say, well, the President has testified, so I can't allow you, irrespective of whatever. So, but our plan was that the President would be the last witness. But I just want to mention that we continue to ask some people for affidavits to clarify certain matters that we pick up as we prepare, analyze evidence and prepare the report. But we will continue with that work, Mr. President, and in due course, you will get the report. And from my side, I can't wait for the day when I hand over the report and know that I'm done. And leave it to you, Mr. President, and maybe others to decide what to do with the reports. So, but I just want to take the opportunity to thank you. I also thank the staff in your office for the cooperation they've given to the Commission, because the Commission had to interact with your office regularly. And once again, thank you for availing yourself, Mr. President. And indeed, what you said towards the end of your closing statement is important. I don't remember that a head of state, a sitting head of state, has in our own country submitted himself to a commission and effectively said, ask me whatever questions you want to ask me about these matters, and I will do my best to answer, which is what you have done. I think it's very important for our country. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Acting Chief Justice. I should just say that I just want you to be aware that there's a new sheriff at Treasury. And if you ever need further money, it may not be there.
I thought I would stand a better chance with him than the previous one. Thank you. Mr. Pretorius?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. We are therefore going to adjourn at this stage. We adjourn.